Just a reminder, this is being recorded and it's going to be added to our YouTube playlist afterwards. And to adhere to our code of conduct, which is listed in the agenda here. Today is March 15th, 2021, and I will kick off this to Aaron to go over the rest of the agenda items and have him start sharing his screen to drive.
Cool. Can you all see my screen? All right. So happy Monday. We'll start off with a few announcements. We released CAP v036 last week. Couple of interesting things in here. I think this first feature, filter out mislabeled resources returned from Kate's API. This is, I think, a pretty nice win for various, I guess, bits of software that were not returning filtered, not returning resources filtered by labels. So depending on how you implement your, how you implement the aggregated API, this could have been an issue that folks were running into. We have some other things to mention, but yeah, and that's kind of the main gist here. We renamed our Carvel repo to Carvel Community, trying to make these repos a little more clear. And in addition to that, we also published a proposals process and have a few active proposals already in flight. So please feel free to check those out. Another note is we're hiring a staff engineer. So if you're here, it seems like you have some interest in Carvel. If you would like to work with this lovely team and on these exciting tools, then please click that link and learn more.
We don't bite.
And then last announcement is just asking for any feedback if you have it regarding this community meeting. In the interest of iterating, we'll likely introduce some changes in coming weeks, but we'd like to hear from y'all, what y'all like, what you would like to see, anything like that. Cool, then we'll zoom through the status updates. So we did finish up development on the image package performance improvements track of work. It's still on the develop branch right now, but expected to be in the next release. The image package recursive bundles track is very much in flight. Same with YTT schemas. We'll talk about both of those a bit more in detail today. We have some CAP enhancements that are also in progress. Just due to team members being out this week, we may make limited progress here. So just wanted to call that one out. And then kapp-controller, we are continue to work on the package manager API, and as well as some more stability focused enhancements. So feel free to click any of those links to dive into more. Before we get started with this week's plans, if you have anything that you want to bring up today, we'll try and make sure that we leave some time at the end to go through both discussion topics, and we'll try and get to at least one of these triage helps. So with that said, let's get started. I guess, is there anything else from anyone before we start? Cool.
Sorry, I'm actually curious. So 6.0, do you have any expected time frame for when that might be released?
We, I guess, haven't really communicated one yet. At this point, it's likely to be released when the recursive bundles track is done. So it's more feature scoped within a few weeks.
Okay, cool.
All right, so jump into the backlog. How we start with recursive bundles today. So we can kind of see we have a 3-pointer that's in review. We got a 1-pointer progress. We already pointed this one, so maybe we'll try to get through a couple of these today. So starting with this first one, pull updates all image lock files. Dennis, would you like to walk through this?
I could, but I'd have to read it in as well. I can try though, unless you've already read it, Aaron. Okay, so the use case. So this is about pulling updates. So when you do an image package pull with a recursive bundles, it's gonna update, I guess, all the image log files recursively in all the bundles that it's bringing in. So we're going to create a bundle to distribute to multiple applications that are part of a deployment. So prerequisites looks very similar to the other stories. It's basically just outlining a bundle that references another bundle, and there's a couple of images essentially as leaf nodes as part of these two. The bundle that references a bundle. Going through the acceptance criteria, scenario number 1, we want to make sure that updates all the image log files for all bundles after copy. So we push a bundle that references another bundle, and then we run copy from one bundle to another repo, and we have the experimental flag turned on. And so that when we run image package pull with a -r recursively, referencing the bundle we copied and to a directory, then we should see then this output has already been done for us. But at the very bottom of the output, one difference is changing, updating all images in the image log file. So changing all images, registry repository references in this to other registry. So we already have a logic that updates image log references in the images YAML file, but we want to do that for all the recursive bundles as well. It looks like. So like the last 3-4 lines is essentially a delta between what we have today and what we want tomorrow. And then when we cat, and then when I execute, so when we look into the contents of an images YAML file inside the recursive bundles image package directory, and then we see, I guess, the contents being rewritten, I think. And then when we cat the images YAML that got brought in by the nested bundle, then we also see the images YAML also being updated as well to the other registry.io bundle. And then when we cat another bundle, images YAML, so all the images YAML that got brought in need to be updated essentially. And then scenario number 2 does not update image log files if no relocation has occurred. So in this scenario, we're going to copy it, but it's not going to essentially, I guess, update the image YAML file because I guess we only push it, but we don't do a copy essentially. So I'm guessing. So like, let's go. So we look at the images YAML file, and then everything's in my registry, and then we push up an R bundle in my registry, but we haven't done a copy. But now we do a pull -r, and here it's not mentioning anything about updating the images YAML file. It's just pulling all the bundles recursively. So now when we cat the images YAML file, it shouldn't say other registry. It stays with my registry.io, and then we're going to cat the nested bundle images YAML, and that still says my registry.io. And then we cat the other nested bundle images YAML file, and that still says my registry.io. It hasn't changed to other registry because we didn't copy it. That seems to be the story.
So in that second scenario, if one of your images in your images lock file does not exist at myregistry.io, you would expect that not to change as well.
If one of the images does not exist in my registry.io,
Like
It shouldn't
the
change.
leaf image.
I think it's whatever the current logic is, which is it just stays the same. It only checks to see whether it's been relocated, and if it has been relocated to the destination repo, then it rewrites the updates YAML file. I think that's what it does. I think we want to preserve that for this recursive logic.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes then, right? Like, it sounds like scenario 2 is sort of a pedantic way of saying, if you didn't copy it, nothing new occurred. No behavior changes. Just being really precisely stated. Okay.
Any other questions? All right. Do y'all want to point? Cool. 3, 2, 1, shoot. You got 2s and a 1. Either side want to speak to their pointing?
I put it to, I mean, I think the simple implementation, the simplest thing about this implementation is like updating the images log file recursively. The thing that made me go to a 2 is just the way we want to structure the output. It's just all grouped together. I mean, I've just yeah, just the just I don't another point just for the logging. I've had problems with the logging in the past. That's all. But it seems like a lot of the implementation has already been done in a previous story, which is we're already recursively going through all the bundles. It's now just also making sure to call this other thing, which is update the images YAML file, and that code has already been written.
I see. So are you saying that there's like some essential complexity in doing the bookkeeping of like what got relocated where? That because we're reporting that at the very end, that means there's work we have to change in the way we're collecting that information and
Yeah, I
Okay.
suspect so. I have a
Mm.
feeling, just intuition here, like just the fact that we're grouping all the output at the bottom and not interleaving it. Like we, you see nested bundle, we extract a layer,
Mhm.
that's maybe where we would have written the images log file, but we want to consolidate it at the end. I feel like that might just drive up the complexity a little bit. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and it seems like that is nearly essential, because if we did that interstitially, then this really important piece of information about the fact that the lock files are getting rewritten gets buried in all the minutia of the individual moves. So yeah, seems essential. Cool. Yeah, I totally pop up to it too. I didn't think about that bookkeeping piece.
Okay, cool. Sounds like we're landing at a 2 then. Assuming, I guess, does anyone want to change their vote? I certainly led the group in a direction that way. But we'll keep going. All right. Dennis, would you like to speak to this one as well?
That will get to it this week though. I don't know if you want to spend more time on things we're going to get to, or I can definitely just read it as well. Up to you.
It might be useful just to point it
Okay.
out. Yeah.
All right. I haven't read it, but document recursive bundle feature. So yeah, we want to document this really cool feature we've been working on. When we access image package in the Carvel dev website, there's a documentation page. So we can see documentation about the new feature. Some dev notes, we can piggyback on the proposal that Joel wrote, and we should explain the pull command to inform the reader where the bundles will be placed on the disk. So when you do a pull with a -r and -o, like just explain that there's a convention about where the nested bundles are going to be pulled into, I suppose.
Any questions on this story?
Any sense of whether or not this should be something that could sort of easily be placed in existing structure? If this might involve calling out, or if it's distributed throughout documentation, or that we want to talk about this as like just a completely separate topic. Any thoughts on that?
Or whether there should be a workflow, like is this like a workflow we're trying to solve similar to an air-gapped environment? Or or like you said, is this like a nested point in the pool documentation? Could be both. Like, you know, in the pool doc, there's a sub bullet that explains the -r flag and then what it does, and just some pointing out things that might not be completely self-evident, that, you know, where the nested bundles are going to be placed, the new .bundles directory structure I'm talking about here. And if we are solving a workflow or use case, which we are, maybe a workflow, a scenarios.md that outlines why you would want to use recursive bundles, that might be useful as well.
Okay, that's helpful.
Anything else from folks? Feel ready to point? Cool. Pointing 3, 2, 1, shoot. Got 1s and a 2. The opposite from last time.
I think getting words are hard. I think that there's probably enough in there to like try and convey this succinctly, and that, yes, I think the proposal will definitely like help not having a blank canvas problem, which maybe that makes it like a large one instead of a small 2, but that's right on the edge for me. And we see how much it matters being able, when we provide clear documentation, it's precise in its wording and is written thinking about from the end user's perspective and not just describing the feature, that can take some work. So those are the things I think about when it's not just putting words on paper. Doesn't have to get compiled, but in some respect, that sort of makes it even harder sometimes. That's my thought.
Anyone from the one side?
The reason I pointed as a 1 was because we haven't added any new, well, I don't know about this wording, but new functionality like pull, copy, and push all already existed. So there's a lot of work there prior that we can use when writing this documentation. Like we won't be going through a whole new feature or something that intense. I think it's just going to be sort of modifying what we have already with this new workflow.
How about we throw points once more? 3, 2, 1, shoot. All right. Cool, good conversation. All right, so let's move away from recursive bundles. Let's take a peek at schemas. So we have a 2 that's currently under review, a 3-pointer that's in progress, and a 2 already pointed. Do we think we need to point another story?
I don't.
All right.
I think we got enough horizon here.
Cool. So then I think there is, let's see. There is maybe, I was wondering if there's a cap story that we should point. Let's see. So we do have a cap story in flight. How's this going, Garrett? Do you want to talk about this? I don't know if we have discussed this as a group.
Yeah, we could give it a talk as a group, just saying what's kind of missing in our documentation at the moment and how we could see changing it. I picked this up about an hour ago, so I haven't made any progress towards changing the documentation yet, but essentially there's also a Slack conversation in our Carvel channel explaining the same kind of issues of not being able to understand these fields in these rebase rules for cap. So for the type field, it's in the examples, but it's not explained whatsoever. And that could be fixed, as well as it seems like there's not really a clear distinction between what new and existing means under the sources field. So some investigation into what really those things mean, as well as changing the documentation, I think is the steps here.
Cool, and it looks like there is a little bit of conversation going on in here. Does anyone else want to add anything further?
I myself am still trying to understand it. So if anyone does have an understanding that they can clarify here, that would be pretty nice.
Yeah, I think that the TLDR is that from cold, it's hard to know what new and existing means. And like, what does changing the ordering of those do? That's not detailed in the docs. And then the type, I think just doesn't have any documentation at all around it. So like even just having something would be an improvement. Just literally like, what are the values? So, and then a little bit of description about what the expected behavior of that type is. I think Bronson did a pretty good job of like kind of pulling out, like contextualizing those bits. But that's the high level thing.
Do folks want to point the story? Cool. 3, 2, 1, shoot. Ones will take it. Let's see. So we do have another cap story that's coming up that would be after this, which is number 11, which we maybe could get to this week. Does anyone have significant context that they want to present the story?
How does this compare priority-wise to the explore around, or is this the initial story for externally applied resources, like cluster fulfilled resources? Is the same thing?
I think
Oh
194.
no,
Yeah,
one's custom logic. Yeah. Oh, so 11 is above that. Okay.
So I know 11 came from Dustin as well. And for him, the 194 was a higher priority.
Okay.
So I think 194 Explore story kind of spun off as from there's another cap story, cap number 52, I believe. So before working on wait for CRD's existence at runtime. We wanted to play this 194 Explore story. So I think that's higher priority. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Well, thank you. Great. Then I think we have sufficient runway for the week. Let's see, any discussion topics added? Doesn't look like it. But I think we could switch over to the triage help topics. That sounds good to people. Maybe starting with this first one.
I did provide an update for that one. We mentioned it at the community forum last week. It was something we talked about in a prior community meeting, so I added some notes there. Feel free to check it out. The TLDR is basically adding this feature would change the UX of YTT in terms of how files get output. And then also there may be a security complexity with it because it's a common use case for people to template, like for example, Kubernetes resources secrets. And so the output of YTT could contain sensitive information. So writing that to disk is something that I think we don't want to support for now. And that is sort of a consensus from my own opinion and also from the community meeting. If others have thoughts, feel free to reply in this thread or check it out.
That sounds good. Anyone have any thoughts on that one right now? Or should we move to the next? Cool. So move to cap number 183. Which is actually 89. Let's see, looks like there might be a bit of context here. Oh, okay, there's another person running into the same issue. So at a high level, it's when using null. Well, I guess because null is not what init containers is expecting. Is that correct?
Yeah, this has to do with like some templating that Cap does when you have versioned resources. It's trying to update the references to those versioned resources that when you go to do another deployment gets another revision. Yeah, I'm not clear on how to connect that with the init containers, but it's effectively that where Cap currently is not relaxing it doesn't know what type that thing would need to be if it was updating init containers. Or anything that expects to have a particular like collection. And so I think this is about either just not tripping over the fact that it's null, or I think that's the heart of it. It can be helpful to note that there's like a workaround that like may of just basically people removing that field when it is null. So in some sense, the fix would be, I don't know that it would be removing that field, but it would be like making sure that we just don't trip over it.
I found a thread in our private Slack where Dimitri comments on us talking about this issue, saying that both of the issue before and this issue 89 relates to kapp's use of template rules, that when kapp tries to update a reference, it's going to walk through some expected YAML, and those template rules are what specify what kapp expects. And so we would have to relax some of those template rules in order to allow values like null to be in this field. And I think that's kind of the comment at the end of the previous issue, is that we needed to discuss like what are the risks of relaxing these template rules.
So I guess just more of a meta note, but it's the first time we're kind of doing this triage help section in this meeting. And we have time. Do you want to just kind of brainstorm and see, what risks surface to people? Or do we want to tackle this in a different way?
I think that's a great idea and a good use of our time here. I don't know about others on the team, but I might need some more information about how template rules work currently in order to come up with those risks. Because the problem with the null types is something that I'm not really sure what the root cause is.
Interesting. So yeah, it would be like, I clicked on that reference. Let's see, can we point to that? So from the private Slack, here's the line number that Dimitri had pointed to. In the code base. Basically, what he's showing us, like, well, we have all these rules that are defined, and notice that there's init containers in some of those rules. So the rules are going to attempt to traverse down this path. And the question is, if we say, well, it's not an error if you can't get any further because we're going to treat null as equivalent of empty list. Is that a problem? Like, does that for example, does it accidentally cover for what would otherwise have been a defect? That would be really helpful to know that it was null, for example. Is there a problem with taking the case of null and empty list and treating them as the same? Or is that okay?
That's helpful, thanks.
Yeah, that's not all of what you were asking, Carrie, but that's like one step closer of like, okay, well, this, if we were to like dig in through the code, we could see that that's a big piece of what's happening here. Is you're not going to be finding a line in the code that says if it's init containers, like, but in general, yeah, maybe that's the more broad thing, is while we're traversing a path, if we expect it to be an array, can we? How would we know when a particular path is an array? like there's one clue here where the subsequent path element talks about how to traverse an array. Almost all of these, I think, are all indexes, which means do this once for each, search through each element in that list.
This for me also spawns off like another question, which is, so we have these optional fields that might as a value have an array. And one of these optional fields is init containers. Another one is on line 269 volumes. And so if we decide that null for init containers means an empty array, should we make it consistent for the other optional fields that have arrays as values like volumes?
Yeah, I guess what I'm noting is exactly that actually the way that we would get that done for init containers, there isn't specialized logic for init containers. It's just that whatever is doing that walk today thinks that it needs to traverse over an array. It was expecting an array and it's not present.
Okay, I thought it was maybe a change in this file, but it's a code change that interprets this file differently.
Well, that's another angle, right? Is basically having like an Elvis operator. So like a thing that says, well, it's okay if this is null.
Yeah.
Or not okay if it's null.
Yeah, so like an all index is true, or like something that says it's okay not to treat null as an empty array or something.
Like I know that they do that in Kotlin. So you like throw a question mark at the end of the identifier and it says this may or may not be null. And it's called optional operator, or colloquially Elvis operator. May or may not be there.
I mean, with containers, that's a required field for are we looking at a pod? But you know, you need to give it a non-empty array for containers, I think. And so if you gave it null today, I think it's going to break at template rendering time. Whereas if we just skip over a null containers array, I think we get an error at deploy time. Kubernetes will say, actually, you got to give me a non-empty array. So like in that case, we're getting feedback, an error feedback later rather than sooner. If we just apply it broadly to every, you know, array, treating null as an empty array.
That's a great point.
I'm trying to imagine what it means to be an empty array in this context. So like, for example, 274, if we're trying to match on this containers with config map keyref, if containers is an empty array, then we'll never match any further down than that, an environment or config map keyref. And so is our options like not to error out if we don't find that item? Or would we error when we hit the next key that doesn't exist? Like, for example, emp.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I think, yeah. So these paths are meant to describe places to go look to see if there's a reference. And so therefore, yeah, that's a really good question. So therefore, if there weren't any containers, then there won't be any config map key references. So you're good because like the parents way up the tree is not there. So yeah, the like restating like what I think is sort of the core question here is, can we, and like containers, like for the reason that you said, Dan, is actually like a really like both motivating and as an example, but also like one that you just can't imagine because you can't have deploying without, or a pod spec without containers. But in init containers you could. And so the question is, if init containers is null, would that be considered, like it's currently an error, like CAP won't handle that. Like you have to go in yourself and either remove that field or you have to put in an empty list.
And Kubernetes is totally fine with init containers :null in a pod spec. So we could also just have a way for it when we define this rule saying, it's okay for this value to be a null array because Kubernetes is okay with it being a null array. But you wouldn't want that logic to apply to containers because you want to know that something's wrong earlier, like during template rendering time. If you give containers :null, Kubernetes is going to fail, but CAP can also tell you that before we even talk to Kubernetes as well. And I think that's what it does.
Like, yeah, I wonder is truly a genuine question. Like, is this the mechanism that should be detecting that? Like, if we're passing in a manifest that has an either null or empty list containers, like that's going to be a problem regardless.
Right now it's blowing up during, I'm assuming here is during the template rendering time it blew up before it even talked to Kubernetes. Is that true, or where did it fail?
Well, it's not blowing up on containers, it's blowing up, oh wait.
Even in your example, if you gave containers a null, wouldn't it blow up for the same reason?
Yes.
Right. So where does it blow up into, like, is it before it talks to Kubernetes, or is it when it's trying to talk to Kubernetes?
Well, we've got the resources in hand. So I'm trying to think about like the order of operations here, whether or not we're in the midst of, has to be happening before we apply.
Right. That's the assumption I was going with.
Calculating a difference though.
So like with this triage section, maybe it's just as a risk is we might, like, making decision might impact how early we can get an error feedback back to the operator, but it still requires digging into. There might be implications as to how early we can give feedback to the user before talking to Kubernetes or not.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if it's even a new risk, because what happens if somebody supplies a containers that's an empty list?
Empty array or null?
Empty array.
Yeah, it makes it to Kubernetes and Kubernetes then complains. Yeah.
So this is not new in that sense. Like that CAP already isn't trying to protect you from violating the API schema per se.
Got it. That's fair.
How is this situation different with versioned resources? Because I know that was mentioned in 189. Was it also mentioned in 89? Or 183?
Yeah, what it's talking about is these template rules are being triggered because the subject resource is versioned specifically. There's a config map. Like if we go back to that, those rules.
Yeah, that was like a config map matcher.
Right.
And the next
So
one's
here,
like a secret matcher.
Yeah, this thing here, exactly. So this is saying when you have a new version of a config map, here's all the possible places where that config map might have been referenced. So go through this entire path and make sure those are updated too, because kapp is generating that new name for that config map. And so all the references have to get updated as well. So that's why this whole thing gets triggered with the versioned resource feature getting enabled for something, and it is by default for config maps.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so I think this is probably the question on the table is like, I mean, explore what's going to happen, the change in behavior if you just treat something that's null as an empty list in the path walker.
Is that like an exploratory testing, or like do we have like some testing? Can we just like rely on our testing infrastructure around kapp to give us even more confidence, or what does that look like?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I would hope so. I would hope so.
Okay.
But yeah, that's actually, you know, that's a good excuse to get in there and get an inventory on that. Yeah, because did you want to do this for anything that could be null or just collections? Or specifically sequences like this? I think it's that.
Yeah, I would base my decision off of testing and see what the implications of allowing that is.
Cool. Okay. So does anybody feel confident that they can like update this ticket with like that as like a next action step that can be taken here? Doesn't have to be something more than that at the moment. In terms of like trying to close the loop on this question, we could sort of summarize what
take
we
that.
talked about here. Thanks, Garrett.
Yeah, I can take that action item.
Awesome.
Cool. Thank you, Garrett. We do have one more triage help. Let's see if this rings any bells for folks. We do have less than 10 minutes though, so if no one's familiar with this, we might just postpone until next time.
Yeah, image reference in the middle of a string. Yahoozo. So today, KBill gives you the ability to tell it, here's the different keys that you should look within a YAML structure to find its value is likely an image reference. But what happens if that value is inside a string somewhere, like right here, where it's like, it's not the string, it's a thing inside the string. So scan through a, you can like maybe name a key like containers or args, something like that, and then say, okay, well, within that, here's a regex that like if this regex matches, then the match group that comes out of that is the image reference.
Would that require a change to k-build? I'm wondering, could they leverage environment, a container, and okay, inside a container entry, leveraging an environment variable? So like the environment variable will be defined as part of the deployment spec. And then inside the CLI, they would just reference the environment variable. And then k-build could just find that environment key and just do what k-build does. As another, like that wouldn't require any changes to k-build.
Nice. Nice. Is there more context on this?
Yeah, I remember trying to kind of provide a fix for his problem, for their problem. I believe Carrie was with me. Is that true? I don't remember. But I remember that we couldn't replace the image argument without getting rid of that -- some image arg prefix. Like we could successfully identify, like, hey, match on this image, this is what it's going to look like. So we provided that search rule, but it didn't exactly do what they wanted. So,
oh yeah, there you go. Regex rule, nice.
And I know we've also been talking about having some like way to provide Starlark functions as arguments into some of our tools. So maybe that's a thought here as well. Instead of having like this regex, it's Starlark based.
Yeah, that's interesting. Right. So like we've talked about, we have sort of the more obvious strategies, and then there's a all-in strategy. I'll hold the rope you can handle. Knock yourself out. Go get your image reference. I do really like the way you're thinking, Dennis, about what do they call that? When you there's sort of there's essential complexity, there's optional complexity, and then there's accidental complexity around like and so there's a piece in here about like, well, if it's optional functionality where like you could truly like get what you need with existing functionality and the workaround is not onerous. It's an important caveat. Then you actually can help keep a lid on complexity, on that particular flavor of complexity, which is really important to the community. Like the simpler the tools are, the fewer bugs there'll be, just hands down. So where we have opportunities to reasonably provide workarounds would be maybe an interesting thing to suggest here and see if that flies.
Yeah, I'm happy to pair on with somebody to, reply to this issue if someone's interested.
I can help you with that.
Cool.
Okay.
Cool. Well, I think we made it through the triage list. Thank you all. All right. Well, we did it. Anyone else have anything top of mind for them? All right, Nancy, take us home.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining this week's edition of the Carvel community meeting. This will be uploaded to our YouTube playlist, and we hope that you join us for the next community meeting, which is March 22nd. We meet every Monday at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. We also have Carvel office hours, where we meet every second and fourth Thursday of the month at the same time, 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. So we hope that you are able to join us at one of those options in the future. Otherwise, you can find us on Slack, the Kubernetes Slack channel, which is the Carvel Slack channel, and we're happy to engage with you in any way. Have a great week, everyone.